Do this. Let's click that magic button. Theoretically, we are streaming live on Twitch. That'll take a couple seconds for that to catch up. Well, good morning, good afternoon, actually, for you, my good friend. I should say OH.
IO.
There we go. See, now you know how to answer that. I did an event last year in Cincinnati, and I started it by saying that, and I got this very quiet, like, oh, come on, be proud. It's not like, do I have to play the Michigan Fight song to get you all riled up? But I won't do that to you, Chris. I
Yeah.
too much respect for you, my friend. So.
Well, and in Columbus, we all know the right thing to do. I mean, that's what we do almost every Saturday of the year. That's the most important thing.
Fair point. Fair point.
Yeah. I mean, just to make the case, I have Buckeye football in my background, even.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
Of course you
Yeah.
do. It's the only responsible thing to do.
Of course.
How did the championship game turn out this year? I don't remember. What was
Let's
it?
not talk about it. It's too
No?
soon.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, at
Hey,
least
you know what? I'm happy we had a season. I mean, considering everything going on
yeah.
and considering how late the season started, the fact that we got to enjoy football as many games as we did, I'm super happy. And I'm kind of disappointed that yesterday was the Super Bowl and now I don't have football until August. So,
Right.
I mean,
I am. We'll talk about the Super Bowl because I think we have to. But I am surprised that we actually got as many sporting events in 2020 that we had. I mean, things more or less seem to be going okay. I didn't think we'd have a college football season. I didn't think we'd get through 17 weeks of NFL without somebody, just having a massive case of COVID outbreak. So I guess good. I don't know.
it gave us something to do. And we're enjoying the basketball season now. So, every once in a while there's health and safety protocols, but in general,
Sure.
we're getting to see the stars play and
Sure.
compete. And even though the audience isn't there, it's still a great time to watch as a family. So
I
I'll
actually
take whatever I can get.
Right, right. I actually kind of like it without the fans because you can hear more of the chatter and interaction between the players and the coaches. That's actually kind of entertaining. And
Yeah.
then I don't know if you caught it, but at some point yesterday, Brady was clearly yelling something at his teammates that I'm sure the whoever monitors swear words on air was not happy that went out live. But I rolled it back a couple of times trying to catch exactly what he said. I couldn't quite make it all out, but he was clearly getting his team to do something there. But I like that.
Well, Brady's kind of fun too, because whenever you watch the NFL lip reading, he's one of the primary ones because he is very animated when he
Yes.
speaks. So
Yes.
yeah, we reminisced about that as he was calling back to the sideline.
Absolutely. Well, we'll circle back to Super Bowl, but before we get too far,
Okay.
I should have you introduce yourself because I mean I know who you are, but that doesn't mean everybody knows who you are. So tell us a little about yourself there, Mr. Judd.
Sure. So I'm Chris Judd. I'm the CTO and a partner at Manifest Solutions, which is a mid-sized consulting company based out of Columbus, Ohio. We do all types of IT consulting, and now with COVID, we're doing a lot more all the time remotely. We do a lot of training as well. I've also led the Central Ohio Java Users Group, or CodeJug, for 21 years now. And I'm a Java champion. I've co-authored 3 Java books, and I've written a children's book. Um, I know it's nothing compared to what you're doing, Nate, but I did speak
Oh,
at
I
my
don't know
100th conference about a year ago.
Oh,
I mean, you do
wow.
100 conferences every 3 years. But as someone who, when they graduated from school and their academic advisor said, "What do you want to do with this degree?" I said, "I don't know, but I know there's 2 things I never want to do. I never want to write and I never want to teach." Careful what you wish for.
Right, right. Yeah, it's funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. Recently, I got certified as a John Maxwell certified coach, trainer, and speaker. So I'm really into leadership types of things. We were talking before we started that I recently also started being the throws coach for our local track team. That my son's on the team, and I love doing things with kids. Really trying to inspire them to get into computer science or some type of STEM field. So we can talk about that later on too, if you wish.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm a recovering thrower as well. I did shot and hammer in college and shot and disc and well a little bit of disc. I wasn't very good at the discus. That one always kind of messed with my brain. But I don't know how many people are interested in hearing us reminisce about throwing heavy objects around. But we'll just save that for the pre and post. We'll
I mean, everyone's probably joining in now saying all they're doing is talking about sports. Am I in the
probably
right place?
probably, and I think that's
The
fine.
sports
Gosh
ball
darn it,
thing. What
right?
is
Sports
this?
ball. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I look at the Super Bowl as one of the very few things that everybody, at least in the US, watches, or a lot of people do. And it's one of the few sort of cultural touch points, and especially the commercials around them. I actually pitched the idea of doing like a commercial rap show, and no one on my team bid on that. So apparently none of them, they're all a bunch of curmudgeons that could care less apparently about any of these things, which is fine, I guess. But it was fascinating to watch Brady win. I don't know, his 900th Super Bowl. I think he's won one out of every four of them or some crazy thing at this point. It's a little nuts just how good he actually is at this sport. May we all be that good at that age.
Yeah, I thought it was the combination with him and Belichick, but obviously it wasn't. And at the beginning of the season, he was a little rocky on his new team, and I thought, yeah, this is just going to show who brought the strength to the team. But obviously, even at his age, Brady's doing a great job.
It would be interesting to see what he would be able to do with like any other NFL team. Could he literally take any team to the Super Bowl? I mean, could he take the Raiders to the Super Bowl? Man, I don't know. That one might be a bridge too far even for Brady.
But also, to be honest, their defense was great. I mean,
Yes.
they really stopped Kansas City's offense. So, you also have to give them quite a bit of credit.
I saw something this morning that Mahomes ran for nearly 500 yards yesterday. Not running on the ground, obviously, but literally 500 yards before throwing the ball or being, sacked. And I thought that's
A lot of it was
nuts.
backwards, actually. I couldn't
Yeah,
believe how far he was running back.
yeah, and still managed to make some throws that no normal human being can make. The one where he's like laying vertical or horizontal and he flicks it like 30 yards. Like, yeah, he's got some skills that he's so remarkably lifelike. Well, I'm sure we could probably talk about Super Bowl till the cows come home, but I guess we should maybe turn this a little more technical, at least for the time being. We'll circle back if we get bored. We'll talk more about our wonderful sports ball. But how did you get into technology? How did you decide that you wanted to be a technologist?
So in junior high, I don't know why, but they had we would go down to the library to do research. And I don't know if the capacity of the library couldn't hold everybody, but half the class would go do the research. The other half was in this small room with Apple IIe computers. And they gave us a book with BASIC and said, program. And they actually paired us up.
Nice.
And my friend and I, we just fell in love with it. So even during all of our lunches, we would go back to the room. And I can remember going to the teacher and saying, we filled up this floppy, the 5.25-inch floppy. And she said, well, turn it over and use the other side. I said, no,
What?
we filled up both sides. And she goes, nobody's ever done that before. So,
That's awesome.
we're just doing silly little things. Well, then I got involved in sports and forgot about that love. And when I got to college, I actually went to school for business. I was going to be an accounting major. I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I grew up. And I actually thought it was going to be in the hardware business.
Okay.
And when I say hardware, I mean hammers, nails, saws, because that was the family business.
Okay.
And my stepfather was an accountant. And I thought, well, that's the way you start your own business.
Sure.
And the first quarter, we had to take a class using Lotus Notes and we had to do macros. And everybody else in the class just struggled. And I ended up tutoring everybody. And I realized how much I had forgotten. I loved this.
Right.
So then I started doing that. And I found out about CIS, computer information systems. I dual majored then in accounting and CIS and realized I really don't want to be an accountant. There was nothing I enjoyed about it. So after I got through all the weed out courses, I made that a minor. Sure. And I also got a minor in finance. And I took as many of the computer science classes as I could to round out my experience. And that's where it all started from there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think so many of us have that experience, that first program, that first time we realized like I can make the computer do something. I did this. It's kind of a light bulb moment for many of us. And I suppose it probably goes the other way. Some people do that and they're like, "Oh, never again." I think you made the right choice on the accounting side. I have to imagine that gets a little repetitive after a while, especially around tax season. My suspicion.
Yeah. And what you learn in school, at least my experience was that it's all things like mergers, acquisitions, things that happen maybe once every couple of years. And you have to memorize a whole bunch of stuff. And it's just like, but I can look it up.
Right.
It didn't make a lot of sense to me. So yeah, computers is a lot more fun.
Yeah, I agree with that one. So how did you get into running the jug? How did that happen? What was sort of the impetus behind? Did you kick the group off, or did you inherit it from somebody? What was the story there?
So I went to work for a small consulting company. A friend had recruited me to join, and that company had started the user group,
Okay.
and he was the one leading it. And on the first day, he told me, "By the way, I turned in my letter of resignation this morning, so I only have 2 weeks." And I was like, "You just
Nice.
brought me here."
Nice.
And he said, "Oh, by the way, other duties as assigned, you're in charge of the Java users group." So that's where it started. Then about a year or two later, that organization dissolved based on the .com bubble.
Sure.
They just couldn't make it. And that was my opportunity to become my entrepreneur. I could either continue to work for them for free or I could work for myself for free. So I went independent for 13 years. And that whole time I continued running the user group.
Oh,
Part of it was that was part of my marketing
sure.
strategy and networking strategy. And after about 5 years of that, I was like, man, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And a book crossed my path that really changed everything for me. The book is Never Eat Alone.
Yeah.
And it's a networking book, but not like your parents' networking book. It's very interesting. One of my favorite chapters was Conference Commandos. And in that, he talks about how often, other than a conference, do you get that many like-minded people together?
Right.
And the same is said about a user group too. And I realized, well, there wasn't anyone really coming around and saying, okay, I want to help run this with you. Or if they did, I would give them some assignments and then they'd disappear. So I felt like if I didn't continue doing it,
Sure.
we'd miss out on this opportunity. And then that really also helped get me more involved in conferences and why I love speaking at conferences today.
Nice. I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of user groups, meetups, conferences is that hallway track, that hanging out with people. I mean, I made, you and I were talking about this before we started. I mean, part of why I created this little Twitch stream here is to give me a chance to hang out with my friends again, because they don't get to do that when we're all in virtual mode. And I think people need to, I can't wait to get back to that. Right? I mean, that's one of the things that I miss about being on airplanes is, well, having dinner with you somewhere, in some random city. And so I'm looking forward to that coming back.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be really interesting to see what that snapback looks like and sort of how long it takes before people get comfortable back in that setting. So 21 years, that's a long time to run a group. What do you think is the most underappreciated aspect of that? I mean, do you think I've always sort of had this attitude that some people think it's so easy to run a user group that it all just sort of happens magically. I don't think they appreciate how much work goes into it.
Mhm.
How has that experience been for you? I know you were even, I managed to talk you into having me on at one point. So, that tells you something, I guess, about your standards, but
Um, yeah, it's ebbed and flows over the years. So
mm,
early on, it seemed like a lot more work. Now it seems like a lot less. One of the mistakes I made about 15 years ago was I had a lot of people saying, well, we'd love it to be at lunch. If it was at lunch, we would come to every one of them.
sure.
And we were having evening meetings once a month. So I sent out a survey, and one of the questions on the survey was, does lunch or evening work better for you? And it came back 50-50.
Yep.
And I was like,
Yep.
now I feel kind of obligated to at least try. So now we have 2 meetings a month, one at lunch, one in the evening. And it's usually almost always the same speaker and the same
Sure.
topic to accommodate people's schedules. And it allowed us to more than double the user group. So ultimately, it was a good thing. And it's not quite twice as much work for me, but
Sure.
it is still more work.
Sure.
I'm always trying to recruit speakers. I especially like having local speakers, but it's great when we can have recognized speakers like you and Venkat come. Um, it's getting harder and harder to find sponsors,
Mm,
surprisingly, that want to provide food or door prizes. It used to
sure.
be, a lot of the publishers would provide books. Now they're ebooks, and
Sure.
now they don't readily provide them as much. Uh, a lot of the consulting companies used to provide more food, and for whatever reasons, they tend not to. And then I also feel like we're getting less and less attendance over the last couple of years. And I can't put my finger on it. Might be a couple of things. Might be there's so much content out there on the internet, they can go get the same content somewhere else. The meeting place that we were meeting at renovated, and they added a security desk and a lot more
Mm,
security protocols, which just makes it a little bit of a hassle for a while. The roads in that area were under construction, so it made
sure.
it difficult depending on what part of town you're coming from. And I think people just get out of the habit of attending, and then they stop and they
Right.
forget to come.
Right.
And now, of course, COVID. So,
Yes.
and I think
COVID.
we've had a couple meetings, but not a lot. And I think people are zoomed out. So
Yeah.
that's why we haven't done a lot of them. But I would like to be back in person, and hopefully people will come back and enjoy the learning. The other interesting question I had on the survey was, do you find Judd to be a good networking environment? And to my surprise, 50% responded the same way. And I understand that technical people tend not to like to network,
Mhm.
but 50% in a fill in the blank put, I hate networking. I expected that they'd be thinking about that, but actually
Sure.
writing it down
Sure.
was eye opening and shocking. But we do try to make it as friendly of a networking environment as possible because, we're all in this together. And if we can help
Right.
each other out and grow from each other,
Right.
I think it's great.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think a lot of us struggle with that. It's not easy to, a lot of us have some introvert streak in us. It's part of what draws some of us anyway into this field, and it isn't a natural. I think. I mean, I think back on like my computer science upbringing. We don't teach anything about personal networking. You might have a networking class, but it isn't about how to network with other human beings. That's for sure. And I think we almost look at it as being silly or trivial. But as I think back, I'm pretty confident every job I've ever gotten has been through someone I knew that worked there, and so I think we owe it to ourselves to at least flex that muscle a little bit and realize that it doesn't have to be in sort of a smarmy way or a salesy kind of way, that it could just be, hey, I'm just hanging out with my buddy Chris and he
Yeah.
happens to know somebody that's looking for somebody with my skills and he puts us together. I mean, that's all we're talking about. But
Yeah, I totally agree. And so one of the things I got out of the book, Never Eat Alone, is to have a conference within a conference.
okay.
So like the dinners that you're describing that we've had many times is one of those. One of the conferences I help organize is Code Mash. This is
Yes.
a conference up in Sandusky, Ohio, usually the second week in January. And it's at a water park called the Kalahari. And so it's a really unique, interesting environment. So you can go to technical sessions, you can go to the water park. A lot of people bring their families, so
Yep.
it's very family friendly. And one of the things I do there is I have a dinner where I invite about 40 people one night when food is not provided at the hotel as a part of the conference. And we go across the street to one of my favorite restaurants, Standing Boys. And I do a collection of speakers. I do a collection of my employees. I do also just interesting people I would like to get to know.
Sure.
And it's always a fantastic event and we have a great time. And so I also try to organize it in such a way that I tell my consultants, you are not allowed to sit with anyone else for Manifest. You have to sit with other people to force them to network.
Oh, sure.
And I also give them the attendance list ahead of time. And I tell them, research these people ahead of time so you know who you want to talk to, what you want to talk to them about, so you're prepared to have a good conversation. And they're very thankful for that, me trying to encourage them and teach them how to do networking better.
Oh, that's fantastic advice. I know at a lot of events that I've spoken at, I typically try to say that to people that, eat lunch with somebody you don't know, eat breakfast with somebody you don't know, because there's somebody at this event that's going to be able to help you at some point in the future. There's somebody here who knows something that you don't know, and vice versa. There's something you know that they don't know, and take that time to just, hey, how you doing? Where do you work? What do you do? Get to know people. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be scary. Most people are actually very nice, and I don't think I've ever had anyone literally bite me at an event when I've sat down and chatted with them. So don't be afraid. But
And
that's
if they
good
get up and
advice.
leave, they were probably done with their meal and had to get to a
It's
session.
totally
So
fine. Totally
yeah,
fine. So Java Grunt tells me that yes, user groups being easy is funny, and that he definitely, the virtual content has been a bit of a challenge in some way, shapes, or forms. But he does have a couple weekly, monthly things that he's very regular, or she's very regular on watching. Java Expert does research. Yes, so Java Expert, if memory serves, would be my good friend Jim, and yeah, he is pretty good at doing that. There's no getting around that, having an idea of who's in your audience and how to appeal to them. So, but yes, I recommend eating lunch with somebody you don't know whenever humanly possible. Someday we'll be back in the same meat space as other humans.
I have a friend who has the rule of 3 feet. So
Okay.
if you're in a big group and you see somebody within 3 feet of you that you don't know that is not talking to anybody, it's your responsibility to go up and introduce yourself and start a conversation. So I think that's a really interesting way too to get yourself engaged in networking.
Oh, sure, sure. That's good advice too. Be the one who reaches out. I think a lot of us, are afraid to do that, and afraid to be the one to say hi. And if someone comes up to me and says hi, oh, okay, well, let's have a conversation then. But excellent. So speaking of the pandemic, how you doing? How you holding up? What are you doing to keep your sanity? Are you baking bread? I started baking bread a couple months ago once it got cold here and I couldn't go play golf anymore.
A couple things. One is my wife and I really love to walk.
Okay.
And in Columbus here, we have some really great metro parks. There's 19 of them. And we'd been to many, many of them and a lot of them over and over again. But about half of them we'd never been to.
Okay.
So we made a goal that by the end of 2020 to hit all 19 and go for a hike in them. We got it all done. We even did some up in Delaware County. So
No way.
we've been really loving that.
That's awesome.
I ran my 12th half marathon.
Okay.
It was by myself, but I got it done.
I don't understand the running thing. You lost me there. Get out, do it on a bike. I'm with you. I'll bike a whole marathon with you. I'm not gonna run it. Sorry, I'm not. My surgeon won't let me run anymore. That's off the list.
Well, you've given me something to aspire to. That avatar that you have makes me look young and fit. So now I need to look like that.
I would say you're young and fit. I'm not going to disagree with you on that front. There's this gray color that's starting to show up in our facial hair that's the only giveaway. I've got Berglund coming on the show at some point in the next couple months here, and I intend to drill into him. Like, how is it possible that you have grown adult children? Because he looks like he's about 28. He's like the Rob Lowe of the technology industry. So
Yes,
must be
you're right.
moisturizing. I don't know. Probably fine. Probably fine. So you were a consultant, and then obviously you're a CTO partner at a consulting company. What has that transition been like to go from just being the technologist person to now managing and running a company? Those are obviously different skill sets. What was that transition like for you?
So I still do go out and consult on a daily basis. When I joined, I told my business partner, I still want to be engaged in the technology. So about 50% of my time is still working, writing software, architecting solutions. And I really like it too, because especially with my young consultants, they know I can do their job, right? And when they say, well, you would never do this, like be on call. I'm
Sure.
like, yeah, I'm still on call. They're like, really? Yeah. So I love the technology. I can't get away from it, but I do have to do some of the sales stuff now, some of the recruiting stuff, thinking about the business overall, working with people and consultants and growing their careers, which is a very important part of it as well. So it has been a transition, but part of it I wanted because as a independent consultant, I realized I can only do so much.
Sure.
I can only scale so far. So I really wanted to be in a position where I could, really do greater things and really invest in other people that I couldn't do as an independent.
Yeah, it's clearly you've got that entrepreneurial bent as well, and then some of us have it, some of us don't. I was talking to somebody last week who made a suggestion. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I have the appetite for that. Like, that just isn't in my wheelhouse. And yet for other people, they wouldn't have it any other way. I remember working with this one gentleman who made the point to me that you have more control when you work for yourself, in the sense that you are the one who makes these decisions. There's also a lot of responsibility and potential heartburn that comes along with that, but there's trade-offs both ways. And I think it's quite something and something that I'm sure you've reflected on, to have started a company, to have had the opportunity to employ other people and give back in that way. I think is also really special as well, and underappreciated, frankly.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I came on was, even as an independent, I subcontracted through Manifest for many years, and I started a boot camp for them.
Oh, sure.
And so we started it in 2011, which is, if you look at the history, before the modern boot camp movement has started to happen. And now ours is different than every other model. I consider those more coding schools because they start you from ground zero and grow you from there. In our case, we are hiring recent college grads with computer science degrees or equivalents and teaching them what they didn't learn in school to prepare them for our clients. And so we're hiring them. That's a big difference. They don't pay us. We pay them to learn for 6 weeks. And then they stay on our payroll after that. We place them in our clients. So that's been really valuable. And even before I joined Manifest full time, that's where I realized a lot of my passion lied in really investing in those people and growing their careers. And now 10 years later, we still have our very first boot camper still working for us. And he's one of our trainers in the boot camp. He goes out and trains our clients as well. And
Sure.
he's a wonderful consultant. So yeah, it's been really rewarding to watch these growths. We've had people that have left our program and ultimately gone to Microsoft, AWS, Google. So yeah, it's been a great program for us.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think you hit on a great point. That's something I've been exploring a lot the last, well, few months, really. There is a pretty big gap between what you learn as a computer science or equivalent undergrad, or even frankly in the coding boot camps, and well, now that you're on the job, these are the things I really need you to know. And I think
Right.
a lot of that gets lost sometimes. Is there's this huge gap between, sure, you can hack some code together, but this is more hopefully of an engineering discipline where there's more to it than just banging on the keyboard.
I interview almost 100 recent college grads a year
Wow.
for our boot camp. And it's amazing how many of them, when I ask, what's the largest Java application you've written? It's a calculator
Sure.
in Swing.
Sure.
And I'm just like, we need more than that. So
Right.
that's the type of gap I'm talking about
Sure.
filling. Or one of the other challenges I see coming out of the education system is maybe they've worked on a project, maybe it's 4 people, but they started it from the ground up. And most of the work that they're going to do is brownfield development. And nobody's
Yep.
taught them, how do you enter a project that you've never seen the code before and then start contributing to it? And so I spend a lot of time saying, we have a pre-built project where they come in and we give them assignments
Oh,
so
sure.
that they can get used to that before they go out on assignment. And so we try to also simulate that at our local community college by having a hackathon with them. We pick an open source project. And while they're still in school, we say, okay, let's take a task. Let's take one of the issues that's in GitHub and let's implement it and contribute it, because that's a large code base they've never seen before. And it's
Right.
very eye-opening to them. They learn about command line tools that they had never heard of before. So um, I'm always trying to simulate that experience to get people ready for the workforce.
Sure. Well, and to that point, this is actually something I talked with Trisha G about a couple of weeks ago. We don't teach people how to read code. We
Yep.
focus so intently on writing code, which is crazy to me because if I mean, I guess I didn't get a degree in English, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but if you want to be a professional writer, you're going to spend a significant amount of time reading other people's writing. And yet, to be a professional programmer, we just have you write a bunch of stuff and not read. And yet, it's such a vital skill. To your point, almost every project is a brownfield project. It's maintenance. It's somebody else's code base. We always surround legacy code as this big negative, but that's what most code is. So if you can't handle it, we don't get to do greenfield very often.
Well, even a greenfield 6 months later is legacy, right?
Right. Or 6 days later in some cases.
I also think too, if you've written all their code yourself, you can probably keep it all in your head, right?
Right.
And then you get into these really large projects that you weren't involved in, and you have to realize, where should I care about something and where should I not care about something?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big fan in the TheDreyfus skill model of acquisition. And so when we throw young people into brand new projects and we don't give them the right introduction, and I think most organizations struggle with this, I think they should give them, much like open source projects will have, okay, here's a newbie task.
Sure.
Even something as simple as a spelling mistake, so that they can go find it in their code base and start to feel comfortable with it and then commit it so they get used to the workflow involved. But we tend to say, okay, you have a computer science degree, here's a whole feature. Good
Right.
luck. From the
Right.
user interface down to the database. And you design it, you implement it, and then we're surprised when it comes back and we're like, oh, that's not what we intended.
Right.
But tying that back to the TheDreyfus skill model of acquisition, it's the novice to expert. So if you've ever seen that on an A-Press book, that's exactly where that comes. And there's the novice, and then there's the advanced beginner. And one of the challenges with the advanced beginner is you don't know what's important and what's not important. Yep. Everything looks like the same importance and size to you. So we throw these people into a code base and they don't know what part of their code is more important than the other part of their code. And you'll hear comments like, I need to understand all the code before I get started. They're like, no, it's not humanly possible to understand every bit of their code. And so starting them off small and getting some quick wins, I think is the ideal way of acclimating them to a team.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The technology again is the advanced beginner, but so is this new project. So
Right.
you have two. I'm not sure what's important and what's big enough, and you're trying to do both of them at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I did a presentation for a number of years where I actually talked about the Dreyfus model and like how do we acquire knowledge and how do you move through that. And it's interesting because some people are you're very dangerous when you're in that intermediate space because you think you know more than you really do.
Yep.
It's fun how that works. But it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's another good one for
Absolutely.
people to look up. But I've thought a lot about that because I think one of the things that I've reflected on is, to bring us back into the sports metaphors, if you were to go to watch LeBron James practice, he spends, I'm sure, a significant amount of time shooting free throws, layups, things that are basics, things that are easy for him that he's done thousands and thousands of times. He doesn't practice 360 windmill dunks, very often, if at all. You go to a golf tournament, you watch these guys work out on the range. It's stance, it's grip, it's alignment, it's the basics, the fundamentals. I think we've missed that in this space. People are so quick to always wanting to do the advanced stuff, and I don't need the 101. I don't need to worry about the basics. It's like, yeah, actually, we all do. And it's
Mhm.
good to reflect back on some of that and not get too far ahead of ourselves. And remember that there's a reason why we practice those things. But anyway, so there's so many ways I want to go here. Um, go more into sports, more into technology. Gosh, you're giving me so many fun things to discuss. What do you think is the biggest missing piece in how we teach people computer science? So when you look at the people you're interviewing, the people that come through your boot camps, what's missing? What could we change to make it more realistic for younger computer science people?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I understand part of why it is. What I've noticed too is that as professors go into the field, they typically take the knowledge from that day, and there's not a lot of incentive for most of them to really grow and expand. And
Sure.
so I think that's why I see a lot of swing based projects coming out of college, because when they started, swing was probably a common thing.
Yep.
So I think it's more project based stuff. I think, like the example I gave with our local community college, contributing to open source. So it gets you into that code base you've not seen before and it's more brownfield oriented, I think could be really helpful. I think less focus, and I can't blame our education system. I think a lot of it's the media too, is the hype curve of stuff.
Right.
So it's always interesting that they come in, and when cryptocurrency was the hot new thing, everyone's like, are we going to do cryptocurrency in the boot camp? No, we're not going to do that. Or when big data, are we going to do Hadoop? No, we're not going to do that. So at least the criteria I use for our boot camp is, what do I wish I would have known earlier in my career?
Mm-hmm.
What has knowing it made me more valuable as a consultant? And what is in demand for our clients? So in our case, one of the advantages I have in my role is I get to see about 20 companies and the types of recs that they're sending out, what skill sets they need. And so I can look at it at a wide breadth.
Sure.
And then I also get to see the talent pool, right? I get to see what are on people's resumes and where they match up or don't match up. So I get to see what's in demand. So we're trying to fit what's in demand based on our clients.
Sure.
And what I've seen is sometimes technology can be regional.
Yeah.
I used to run the iOS development group here in Columbus. We had a lot of iOS projects. I went down to Kentucky to speak at a conference, and they're like, what's iOS? We're all Android down here. And they typically are .NET down there, while we're a lot of Java up in Columbus. So trying to meet the regional demand is important for me too. And then finally, what's important to know in your first 2 years of your career? And so, yes, maybe at some point in time, big data, large architecture, all that could be really important, but probably not in the first 2 years. As you talked about, let's focus on the basics, making sure that we know MVC, that we can do web development, that we can work in a large code base, that we know security, that we know accessibility, or some other topics that don't get covered enough inside of school. So let's make sure we understand those and can apply those. And then eventually you'll get to those bigger, more exciting, cutting edge projects just through osmosis or getting assignments in that area.
Right. Being in the right place, the right time, proving you got the chops. So
Yep.
yeah, as I reflect back, none of the things I did in college were very big. Nothing lasted more than a semester. Nothing was even remotely close to the size projects that I got when I graduated. And I think back at one point in my career, I worked on what was, at the time at least, said to be the largest Java code base in the world. And, it just dwarfs anything that you even thought about in college, and
Mhm.
so that, along with the fact that there was always that rhythm of, well, at the end of the semester, you move on to something else. And then you get in the real world and it's like, yeah, no, this project doesn't end.
Yeah.
It goes on and on and on. And you want to work on something else, you got to change teams. And it's like, wait, what? But that's
One of the
definitely an eye
early
opener.
phenomenons we saw too was um, the boot campers would come in and say, those previous boot campers, they wrote awful code. And then the next group would come in and say the same thing about that group,
Yes. Yes. Well, my favorite, and I think this has happened to every developer. You're reading through some code and you're like, what idiot wrote this? And then
It's happened to me.
then you done it was me. I wrote this. I wrote this 2 years ago or 2 months ago. I was such an idiot back then. And I actually, I think that's a good thing though, right? If you look
Yeah.
back on something you wrote a couple years ago and you're not at least a little disappointed in it, that means you haven't learned much in the last couple years. We should be getting better at this. We should look back and go, well, I'd never do it that way again. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do for other people is talk about our mistakes, or talk about, boy, now that I know more, I would not do it that way again, and share that more readily. I'm disappointed that our industry tends to sweep a lot of things under the rug instead of talking about it. Like when a bridge falls down, people write reports about it and then it gets shared all around the world. We have projects implode and it's like, what? Never heard of the Wombat project. Don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to solve that one.
You've not heard of Equifax?
I have. But, my point is that, I mean, obviously some of these we hear about, but then what's the lesson learned here? What did Equifax do differently? How are they making sure that never happens again? And that's the part of kind of closing that loop that, yes, other companies hopefully saw that and changed their practices, got better vulnerability scanning, are better at turning the crank and making that fix. But I just don't feel like we do a great job as an industry of learning from each other's mistakes.
And it's really important too, because if you listen to Uncle Bob, he gives this great statistic that 50% of our industry has less than 5 years of experience.
Sure.
So we're bound to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And then I've also seen that then duplicated in the Stack Overflow surveys too
Sure.
of professional developers. So we have a young cohort in general that is always being replaced. So we do need to make sure that we instill this information as early as possible to make sure that we aren't repeating it, or we're improving and getting better as we go.
Right. Well, and I think there's some things that we take for granted that everybody knows, and that turns out they don't. I was talking to somebody a couple summers ago, and I mentioned Gang of Four, and he just looked at me, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, the Gang of Four, the patterns book." And he said, "Never heard of it." I had to Google the title because I don't remember the title. It's just the Gang of Four patterns book. And so I just assumed that this young man knew about patterns and he'd never heard of it before. Now, I mean, granted, he was right around that just graduating from college age, so it wasn't like he'd been in the industry for 20 years, but still, this was a completely new concept to him. And that really kind of gave me pause to think, well, how many other things do I take just for granted that, of course, all the software engineers on this project know this? I don't need to tell them that. And my guess is that pool is much larger than we care to believe.
I have another example. On
Please.
Friday, um, one of my developers said, "So I just learned about ACID transactions." I was like, "Okay, you've been in the industry 10 years and you're just now finding about ACID transactions." So I asked my boot camp this morning. None of them had learned in school about ACID
Sure.
transactions either. So, yeah, we do take for granted that the things that we learned are also the things that are being taught, but there's a lot more to teach now. So
Yeah.
you try to fit in the same number of 4 years. So I understand how some things
Right.
get forgotten.
Right. I just, this made me remember this experience. I went through kind of a boot camp like thing after college for the company I was working at the time. And part of it was because they took a lot of people from non-traditional computer science backgrounds. And if you had the aptitude, basically try to turn you into a programmer. And so I remember at one point I asked one of our instructors, I said, "Hey, is that pass by value or pass by reference?" And he just kind of got this big smile and started chuckling. And I looked around the room and I realized no one else in the room had any idea what I was asking about. And he obviously explained it to me, and I could tell that he'd never gotten that question before. And I'm just like, okay, good to know. But anyway, so I noticed Java Grunt made a couple more comments when we were chatting there. He talked about or she talked about the Pac-Man rule. The circle always has an opening, I guess, as a networking technique. That's smart to remember too.
Yep.
And then projects don't die unless you're at Google. Well, and Amazon. I guess Amazon kills things too from time to time. But yes, Google loves to kill things, and I still bemoan the death of Google Reader. Probably one of the few. So, oh man. So it's lunchtime, which means I got to talk about food. Um, there's a lot of good restaurants in your neck of the woods. I don't think people give Columbus quite the credit it's due. What's your favorite place to go eat, and how's that working out for you in these COVID times?
It's too hard to pick a favorite one. I mean, Outback is probably one of my favorite ones, but we are very blessed in Columbus. We have a lot of restaurants. A lot of them have actually started here. You might have heard of this little one called Wendy's, another one called White Castle. The pizza place that's really popular here is Donato's. Now they've expanded all over. So, there's just so many of them. And we have other restaurant tiers like Cameron Mitchell. And now he has a bunch of his restaurants that are expanding outside of Columbus. So a lot of them are more regional that you may not have heard of. And then the other interesting thing we have in Columbus is restaurants come here. So I remember going to Denver and eating at a cheesecake factory, being like, this is amazing. I got home. And in 6 months, all of a sudden we got the news that a cheesecake factory, and now we have 2 of them. Or I was out in Denver a couple of years ago and there was a bakery, and I come home and then we have an announcement, the bakery's coming here. So it used to be a lot more fun to travel because I get to eat unique stuff, but all those restaurants come here, so I don't have to travel to eat.
Nice. Speaking of traveling, is there any place you're excited to get back to once we're able to freely move about the country?
I'm looking forward to getting back together with my family. We had a cabin rented for the Christmas holidays, and we decided that wasn't probably a prudent thing to do, so we canceled that. And so, I haven't seen most of my family for a year, so I'm looking forward to that. We got really fortunate that before this happened in 2019, we got to go back to Germany. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I grew up in Germany for 3 years as a child.
I didn't know that.
And my dad was in the military, so we lived over there. And so my grandmother was a first-time immigrant here, and we knew my great-grandparents really well. They lived until I was in high school. So while we lived over there, they came back to Germany. And so we know a lot of our German relatives. So we had a great day hanging out with some of our German relatives that we only see every 5 or so years. So, we feel really lucky. We also my brother-in-law is in the military now, and they may be stationed in Hawaii. So we're looking forward to potentially getting to go to Hawaii. Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be a real bummer of an assignment when that one comes in. I'm sure there's absolutely no competition for that posting. Although I've got a friend who's in the military, and he's in Monterey, California right now. So not the worst place you can spend a couple of years. So it's all trade-offs. But what part of Germany? Because I was in Munich one of the first times I traveled internationally, and when I was at the breakfast buffet eating some of the local delicacies, I realized I clearly must have some ancestral connection because the food spoke to me.
Yeah, and it's ironic. I don't drink, so the beer doesn't do anything for me. In the Bavaria area is most of where my family's from.
Nice. Yeah, there's something about the bread. It works for me. There's no getting around it. I've never been able to recreate that.
And the sausage and the chicken. Yes. I mean, there's just so much good food there.
Yes, exactly. I that's the thing I miss probably most about. Well, I miss seeing all my friends, but I do miss, to your point, the ability to go to these places that are only in those places and to eat the local cuisine.
Well, I say that, but there's a Hofbrauhaus in Columbus too.
Fair point.
So another example of all these restaurants come here. So I don't have to travel to get good German food.
Well, you certainly don't have to do that. I know there's a rather famous place that has pretty good sausage that I've visited more than once when I've been in your part of
Schmitz,
town. Yes,
which is in German
yes,
Village. Yeah.
yes.
Yep.
Yeah, when you have a literal German village, that says something
Yeah.
about where people settled back in the day. I mean, we have a fair amount of that here in Minnesota as well. A lot of Scandinavian as well. Shocking, But I didn't understand the little painted horses that I saw in this one town not too far from me until I went to Sweden, and then I'm like, okay, got it, got it. Now I see why we have all the painted horses. So it's all good. It's all good. Is there a book or a paper or a talk or anything? I know you talked about Never Eat Alone. Is there anything else that just like really inspired you, or that you reach for, that you recommend to other people? Whether it's technology related or not.
So I don't know if you listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, he often asks a question, what book do you gift the most? So I thought you might want to ask that question.
What book do you gift the most?
Well, the book I gift the most is called Thinking Architecturally. Mostly because you gave me a whole box to give away.
That's true, I did.
And you made it freely available for download. So that combination is really good. But no, I really do give that away often. I've gone through the whole box, but I like to give that to my young developers and other people I'm working on projects with, especially people who are aspiring to be architects.
So I think what you're telling me is I should have sold that book instead of giving it away. Okay, fair point. Fair point.
Yeah, you probably should have.
I missed an opportunity there.
In our boot camp, what I also have them do is not only do they have 40 hours a week worth of work, they also have to read 3 books. Okay. So I recommend these all the time too. So it's Pragmatic Programmer,
yes,
Clean Code, and Josh Block book, Java
Puzzlers.
No, the one on the idioms in Java.
Oh yeah, yep.
So those are the 3 books that I require that they read. And then I also lead some of our consultants through developing the Leader Within You 2.0 from John Maxwell.
Oh, cool.
To help them grow as leaders. So those are the primary things.
Nice.
I am reading a really interesting book right now called Diversity Bonus.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily the diversity that we often think about being race or gender or age. It's about skill sets. And so they recommend when you're building a team of knowledge workers, and it doesn't apply if it's not knowledge workers, but knowledge workers like the work we do, you want to have people with different tools and skill sets because they will solve problems differently, right, and provide a greater set. So if you have 2 people with the same tool, that doesn't give you the extra bonus. You need people with a diverse set of tools. So sure. I thought was a very interesting way of thinking.
Nice. The Spencer Gibb says that he's grateful he learned many of these things in his undergraduate CS degree. So good for Spencer. I need to talk to more Spencer about where he learned all these wonderful things, because I think we need some programs to change and evolve, if you ask me. And glad to have you watching us, Spence. We're going to get you on the show here at some point. Is there anything you're streaming these days to help you deal with pandemic fatigue, or anything that you recommend for folks who've reached the end of Netflix?
We did restart. We went back at the beginning. We watched all of the Marvel movies again in chronological order.
Okay.
Like timeline order, which was interesting. And we watched the Harry Potter movies again. We started all of the Star Wars again, including the Clone Wars. Oh. We kind of got stuck in the Clone Wars, sure. But now it's a lot of sports because we feel like we've watched a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time getting my son sometimes to watch live sports instead of a show he's already seen 19 times. He likes kind of watching the same thing over and over again. And like, you've already seen every one of these 3 or 4 times. But there's no rules in a pandemic when it comes to that. We all cope in our own way. So it's totally fine. I recommend Ted Lasso, by the way, if you're looking to laugh a bit. That has been incredibly therapeutic for me.
Yeah, we did watch that. Enjoyed it very much.
That was the content I needed in 2020, and hopefully that show. I read something that Sudeikis, the lead guy, probably only has like 2 more seasons in him before he's going to tap out, which I think is too bad. I think there could be 5 or 6 seasons here, but yeah, I'd rather have 3 great seasons than 5 meh seasons.
Yep.
Trade-offs. Is there any show that you really wish had 1 more season? Or anything where like they cut it short, where they didn't resolve that plot line the way I wanted them to?
My wife and I feel like that happens to us all the time. We fall in love with this show, and why we've waited till they stream now is because we know
Yeah.
when it's ended. We'll get into the first season, then they'll cut it. So yeah, there's been a lot of them over time. I can't think of any of them off the top of my head, but yeah, we're
Isn't
often bummed.
isn't that an interesting change? I've thought a lot about that. You and I are old enough to remember when television shows had a schedule, and there were these things called like summer hiatus and cliffhangers. We're watching Friends with Everett right now, and at the end of season one, we had to explain to him that in the before times, you'd have this 3 month pause, and so they had to put this out there to get you to come back in the fall to watch again. Now you just stream until you hit stop or you fall asleep. I like the binging better. I'm not gonna lie to you, because you see those story arcs more. It's easier to hear the callbacks, and I think it's a more coherent arc when you watch them sequentially, three, four, five at a time. And to your point, you don't get stuck in the Firefly scenario.
Yep. Now, I wonder if that's going to happen with conferences as well.
Mm,
One of the biggest changes that I've seen in myself is, why do I have to go to a conference? Why should anybody go to a conference to see me speak?
sure.
That means everyone has to be there during that 1 hour that we're talking about that topic. And so it's kind of like in the old days when we had to be there at 5 o'clock to watch our
Sure.
favorite show. So I've really spent a lot of time going back and looking at gaining some skills to do more of the recording stuff. Because again, if I'm not there during that 1 hour, that means people miss out, and I don't have that opportunity to interact with them in the same way that if it was on demand, maybe I could.
Sure.
So I just finished a Camtasia certification, and I plan on doing more of recording that type of stuff so that my message is getting out there 24/7. And part of what made me realize that is we talked about doing some OBS type of things.
Mm-hmm.
How much I learned by watching videos on YouTube on OBS
Yeah.
and lighting and cameras. And I'm like, if I had to go to some place to learn about that, I would have missed it. But having it available at my convenience was really beneficial to me. And I wonder if some of my messages are the same.
Sure.
And so then I'm like, well, what am I going to miss from a conference? Obviously, my friends like yourself and all of your other guests. I do enjoy traveling. I know you usually ask mountains or ocean.
Yep.
Before the no fluff, just stuff, I would go to the mountains. But now that we've done Florida and I've been able to spend 2 weeks in Florida, I'm
Right.
like, that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I can see myself retiring to a beach
Yeah.
area now, which
Yeah.
I never could have thought of before. So, and you talked about Sweden, and I had a great time going to Sweden and then to Denmark. So I'll miss the travel and
Yeah.
exploring new things and the people, but maybe it's a combination of both, right? I'll record the same presentation,
Sure.
so it's available all the time, but and it's harder to have a call to action at a conference too,
Right.
because you have a call to action and then 3 days later they get back to the office, but they also saw so much other stuff that it gets all lost in the shuffle.
Sure.
So maybe there's a better way that I can do some of this. And even doing a webinar, you have the same problem. It's that hour that everyone has to be together that may not be convenient.
Right.
So I'm really starting to rethink about how do I share what I want to share.
Yeah. What's the most effective way? Yeah. Java Grunt echoes the fact that the hallway track is what they miss from the conferences, and he says she says this show has the most hallway vibe of anything I've seen. Well, that's kind of what I'm going for, so I'm glad that vibe is coming across, because that's the goal, because I miss the hallway track. I miss hanging out with people. It is an interesting point, because I think about how much information is available to us that 20 years ago wasn't. I think about some of the things I've managed to fix around the house, that the only reason I was able to do it is because there's a 4 minute video on YouTube that someone was kind enough to post. And then I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I could do that. I mean, it's a screwdriver and a pliers. Sure. That seems like that's within my capabilities. So thank whoever put that kind of information out there. And I wonder, like, what does that look like for us? The big thing that I always try to emphasize when I do live events is you can ask me questions. You can interact with me in these sessions. It's really hard to do that with a video, to say, wait, what did you just say? Or can you repeat that? I mean, obviously you can skip back, but to ask for more depth, or can you rephrase it, that part kind of falls away. But it'd be interesting to see kind of what sort of hybrid comes out of this, next year, whenever we start flying again.
Yeah. Well, some of those platforms allow you to have some more of that interaction. It may not be real time, but asynchronous.
Hmm.
You know, so maybe it's not posting to YouTube, but some of these more educational learning platforms. So
Yeah.
I think there's still ways of getting some of that. But yeah, the hallway conversations, friends, the interesting travel,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are biggest things.
I do think one of the sort of underappreciated aspects of conferences too is it's a time block that you have taken out of your life for some, a day or two or three. And it's a lot harder to get roped back into something when, oh, well, no, Chris is at a conference this week. Now, you still get pinged, we've all gotten those emails or those Slack messages while we're supposed to be at an event. But it's harder to yank somebody back in than if they're at their desk and it's just a Zoom window or just a browser tab, and oh, we got a production outage. Yeah, I'm pulling you in, and I'm going to miss half a day of this thing. And so I do think the physical proximity of I flew to this place, or I'm driving to this place in the morning, and I'll be there all day. There is an advantage to that as well in giving someone the permission structure basically to soak in that information as opposed to oh, well, I could watch 10 minutes and then I got pulled into this question and I lost the whole thing. Or I gotta take time tonight to watch it. Yeah, forget that noise. I've got Ted Lasso to watch.
But if it's recorded, you could pause it and then come back later potentially.
Sure,
Where
sure.
again, if it's a webinar, it's live, you don't have that ability.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just think it's hard for most of us to block out an hour randomly, to do these kind of things. That's why I appreciate anybody that's watching us live. I think that's awesome. So thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Java Grunt. Whoever else is watching us. I'm not sure how many people we have watching us, but I
So as
appreciate
a
it.
speaker too, I question because I speak a lot about goal setting and I have this thing called smart wins. And one of the tactics I talk about using is the immovable wall.
Okay.
And for a conference, the immovable wall for me to prepare material is Jay sets a date of the event.
Yes. Yes.
And if I'm not ready, he's not going to move it for me.
Yep.
So that's immovable. So
Yep.
I need to make sure that I am prepared and ready for that event where, if I get to record it and I get to choose when it goes out, I can
Right.
easily see it slipping. But, I have to thank Jay and the other conferences for forcing me to deliver content because otherwise that probably wouldn't happen. So any of your listeners might want to use that as a strategy to motivate them.
It's a very useful forcing function, to be very clear. I cannot tell you how many talk ideas I've had that if somebody doesn't actually schedule the darn thing, it isn't going to get built. And it's like, oh, that's right. I forgot I have to build that talk. I better go work on that. It's the best strategy, by the way, if you want to force yourself to learn something.
Yes.
Volunteer to give a talk on it in a couple months, and that's one of the most effective techniques that I've ever used to try to pick up some new thing. So we'll steal that, but. Well, you mentioned lightning rounds, so I might as well go through some of the lightning rounds.
Sure.
And I actually already know some of the answers to these. So I'm actually going to modify this: coffee, espresso, or Pepsi.
Pepsi Zero.
I'm sorry, I knew there was a modifier on there, but I wanted to goad you a little bit. So,
And I prefer to call it Pepsi Max because that was his previous name. And I think the Max
they dropped the
sounds
max
tougher.
now.
Yeah.
Right. I want to know what crazy sort of chemistry came up with, like both the Coke Zero and the Pepsi Zero, or the fact that you can make it taste like regular Coke or regular Pepsi. It's nuts.
It's a different sweetener. It's the aspartame sweetener.
It's amazing, and I'm sure it's probably we'll find out in 20 years that it's killing us, but everything's killing us.
Yeah.
There's no way to stop that. If you live in Australia, I think 90% of Australia is trying to kill you. At least that's what my Australian coworker tells me. But all right, I won't talk about oceans or mountains since we're to talk about. How about pie or cake?
I'm a big cake fan. My mom was a professional cake decorator, and she would have these big bowls of ice cream. And when we were good, we could take a spoonful, just one, because you can't recontaminate it. And at one point, we realized that there were certain places in the house, if we jumped, the cake would sink in, and she couldn't sell it. So there was a while we got away with it, and then she realized what was going on.
Oh, that's crazy.
I've eaten a lot of cake in my day,
Well played.
as you can tell.
Well played. Well, I mean, I got a couple pounds on you, friend. Maybe a couple stones to be real polite. Food truck or Michelin stars? Now we obviously touched on some of the amazing food culture in your neck of the woods, but which do you reach for?
Probably casual dining in the middle somewhere.
Okay.
I like food trucks; they're good, and the only time I get to go to fancy dinners is with you, really. So Casual dining. That's my
I
place.
try. We will blame Neil Ford for showing me what Michelin star is all about. But that's been my biggest disappointment. Again, talk about zeroth world problem. But my all-time favorite restaurant I haven't been to now in over a year, and it makes me sad that I haven't been able to go there. But I'm hoping 2021 I'll one way or the other make a trip over and hang out there. DC or Marvel?
I'm a huge Marvel fan, but what I've noticed is I like the Marvel movies,
Yes.
but I like the DC shows.
Yeah.
And I don't know why DC can't get the movies right and Marvel can't get the shows right, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
those would be my preference.
Okay. Yeah, and DC's got some great characters. I really don't know why it's been so hard to translate that to the big screen. I mean, the Wonder Woman movie was fantastic. Maybe not so
Yeah.
much 1984, but yeah, the original was awesome, and I'm hopeful they'll keep going back to that well.
I will say the WandaVision has been extremely well. So
Okay.
I may have to put an exception in there for Disney Plus,
Sure.
and the next one looks good too. But
Okay.
in general, Marvel movies, DC shows.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, we haven't started WandaVision yet. That's on the list. So, and I think it'll have to happen soon. Actually, my son mentioned that some of his friends are watching it and recommending it, so that's usually what it takes to get us over that hump, for at least to drag him into it. But
And it feels more like the movies,
okay.
and it really feels like it's a part of that whole universe,
Sure.
unlike some of the previous shows.
Sure. Action, comedy, or drama?
Action.
Yeah, like that one. Are you a night owl or a morning lark?
I'm morning.
Okay. It's interesting how that tends to shift in our lifetimes. When I was in college, the idea of waking up before like 10 a.m. was, are you kidding me? And then I got a real job, and it's like, well, then you just sort of get on that habit of course I wake up. I mean, even now, without an alarm, I'm still getting up between 6:30 and 7:30, regardless. And there's nothing I can do to sleep till noon. Like my kid, he's a teenager. He'll sleep forever if you let him. You told me about that. I never forget. I know this a couple years ago, you and I were having a conversation. You said when the kid becomes a teenager, and I was a little skeptical, but I also knew that your son's a year ahead, and so I figured you weren't just totally making that up. And I know you and I have talked about this, but swear to God, it's like a switch flipped, and the kid went from being awake at 6 a.m. to you gotta go prod him with a cattle prod if you really need him awake.
Yeah. We had to start turning off the whole internet in the house to make sure he would go to bed. Yes.
We've had discussions about app limits, and there was one evening I got a request from the young lad to increase the limit on one of his apps. I'm like, it's 11 o'clock. You need to go to bed. Like, I should already be asleep. So no, I'm not going to give you another hour on this. Like, oh, please. Like, no, it's a game. And I know you're playing with your buddies, but everybody should be going to bed. This is why you're so grumpy in the mornings. Yeah.
So the next thing you're going to hit, which I hit over COVID, is driving.
Oh God, no.
So my son got his license during COVID, which was good and bad at the same time. I mean, the nice thing was we got to do all of the merging onto exit ramps with nobody on it or very little traffic.
Great point.
Yeah, so that was nice. Of course, the in-car driving with a teacher, that was a struggle.
Sure.
Getting appointments at the DMZ and then having to wait in line, that was awful. But in some ways, I was really glad that was going on because I think it made it a lot easier.
God, I don't even want to think about that. Thanks, Chris. I knew you'd eventually give me something that'll make me just go, oh, how did we get to be so old? That's what I want to know. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Okay.
I have a slight allergy to cats.
Okay.
One cat I can handle as long as I don't touch him, and especially then touch my face. If there are two cats in the house, there is no way I can be in the house. My wife thought it'd be a good idea to go get a cat. We do have one cat.
Okay.
And again, as long as I don't touch it, I'm fine. But when the previous cat passed on, she's like, let's go to cat welfare. And I wasn't really thinking about it. I walked into cat welfare and immediately my eyes swelled shut. I couldn't breathe. Oh. I had this horrible attack. I had to go out in the parking lot and wait for her and my son to pick out the cat. So I'm never going to cat welfare again.
Nope. That's probably wise. I will admit we have two cats, so if you ever visit me, we'll just hang out on the deck. But watching the puppy bowl yesterday for a little bit, my wife and son were watching that, and they both tried to do, well, what do you think about getting a dog? And I'm like, I like dogs, but dogs are a lot of work. You got to walk the dog, you got to crate the dog, got to potty train the dog. There's a lot goes into being a dog owner. lot harder to travel with a dog unless it's small enough that you bring, him with you. And that's where I realize if we get a dog, as much as I know my son likes to say, well, I'll walk him. It's like, yeah, that ain't gonna last. That's gonna end up being mom and dad's dog.
That's a good excuse to get exercise, though.
Well, that's fair. And to your point earlier about going for walks, Christina did a lot of that until the snow fell. And then around here it gets a little harder. I mean, you could do it, although yesterday, I actually saw some people out walking, and it occurred to me that at the wind chills that we had yesterday, a 15-minute walk could result in wind chill. You could have frostbite if you had some exposed skin. And I thought that's not the kind of walking I want to do. I'll pass on that. So I got the bike on the trainer in the basement. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, we take the dog twice a day, every day.
Nice.
And we're very fortunate to live 1 block away from a bike path along the Olentangy River. So it's a great place to walk.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. How about, let's see, what else do I want to ask here? Board games or computer games? What do you prefer?
When I was younger, it was computer games, without a doubt.
Okay.
As I've gotten older, it's been more board games.
Okay.
Especially since COVID, my son has taken up chess.
Oh.
And unfortunately, he's been watching YouTube and these grandmasters, and he's gotten really, really good.
Uh-oh.
I mean,
uh-oh.
It's unbelievable how much he's learned from just watching them. So I lose every time, no doubt.
I'm sure there's somebody playing chess on Twitch.
Oh yeah. I just don't have the time to go absorb it all.
Well, but you run your own business. You got all the time in the world. That's always the great. Everyone I know that's ever run a business, the running joke is you work any 16 hours a day you want.
Yep.
People forget about that part of being the boss.
Yeah. We do a lot of puzzles too. So
okay.
We usually do 1 puzzle in the winter, but with
Sure.
COVID going on, we've done a whole string of puzzles. So I did one with Yoda recently.
Oh.
That was pretty much all green and grays.
Oh my!
It was the second toughest puzzle I've ever done.
Oh, that had to be mind-numbing.
Yeah, Neuschwanstein, a 2,000-piece puzzle, is probably the toughest, but Yoda was definitely a close second.
Okay. I like doing puzzles. We spent a couple days. A friend had just bought a cabin that they were going to rent out, and so we got up there for their first weekend or whatever you want to call it. And so just the family, and we did a puzzle, because if you do puzzles around cats, the cats love the little puzzle pieces, and then they disappear. And so it's a lot harder to do a puzzle when you've got 2 little fur balls running around the house. But how about this oldie but goodie? Tabs or spaces? Where do you come down on that age-old debate?
Spaces.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And I think it's because at one point early in my career, somebody had their tabs so short in their IDE that they would use 2 tabs, thinking that it was more like spaces. And then when anyone else would read it, it'd be way far indented.
Sure.
So spaces are all the same all the time. So I'm a space person.
Okay.
And just like Carducci, I have my editor set. If I hit the tab key, it replaces it with spaces. So
it's always interesting to hear people's explanations on the tabs versus spaces. You get some people who say, well, the beauty of a tab is you can treat it however you want, whereas a space is a space no matter where it is. And it's just one of those things we love to argue about.
And if I'm using other languages besides Java, I try to stick with whatever, like Python, they're using tabs. So I'll kind of stick with that pattern.
Sure. That makes sense. So I want to touch on one other not technology thing, since we started talking about football. I feel like we need to end with football.
Perfect.
I was looking at some of the records that Tom Brady set. Are they ever going to be touched? Do you think there's anybody that's ever going to get close? I mean, he's played in 10 Super Bowls now, which is by far the most. He's got 7 wins, which is 2 more than Haley, who is the only other person who has 5. And you just look at every record he set is so far ahead of anyone else. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, maybe, if he, continues to play at that level and doesn't get injured. He certainly has the skills, and he's just going to get better and better and better as he sees more and more defenses. But I mean, you look at what Brady's accomplished, it just is mind blowing.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I can't imagine, but we've said that about Michael Jordan's records and stuff, and now some of them are starting to fall. So,
fair point.
Yeah, eventually we'll see something.
Records
are meant to be broken. I heard this. Yeah, the stat I was more impressed with this weekend was the fact that 4 out of the last 5 defensive rookie players of the year were all from OSU. So
Really?
go Bucks. Yes.
Wow. Yeah,
You
they've
know,
had a
Chase
pretty good
Young.
run there.
Yeah, Chase Young just did it. The two
Yeah.
Boza brothers. So yeah,
Can you imagine that Bosa household? I mean, that is some serious talent in one house. It's kind of like the Watt family. I mean, my gosh, you
yeah.
look at those gentlemen. I mean, that's crazy. Well, when I think about Brady, it makes me think about the swimmers who are competing against like Ledecky and Phelps, and you're just like, you would have been the best of all time, except for the guy in the lane next to you, or yeah, she beat you by a length just because she's so much better than everybody else. Otherwise, you would have had a world record, but for her. And imagine what that's got to be like. You are absolutely you're just below that person who is so much better than everybody. They're just gonna soak up everything. It's crazy. But anyway, maybe you and I should have a spin-off show like sports ball talk for nerds.
Sure. Yeah.
I'd be down for that. Well, my friend, I could talk to you for another hour, but I'm sure you have much better things to do than hang out here on Twitch with me. I appreciate your time so much. I really genuinely do miss the fact that you and I did not have our normal dinners in 2020. I'm hopeful that something will happen in 2021, if not 2022 for sure. So thank you for hanging out with me, my friend. I appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon. Or as my
Absolutely.
wife likes to say, I look forward to seeing you in 3D.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, that's the right way of phrasing it. I miss the 3D life of everyone. The Zoom is better than nothing, FaceTime is better than nothing, but man, I miss people. All right, well, thank you, my friend. Next week I'm off. We're gonna take a week off here. I'm trying not to do this every single week, but then after that, we've got, if memory serves, let me just double check my schedule to make sure that I'm not wrong. It should be the one and only Mark Heckler is going to come talk to us. He's got a new book out, imagine that. We'll talk about that Java programming language, a little bit of Spring, stuff like that. And I know since it's Mark and I, we're going to talk about coffee. So we got that coming. Well, thank you again, Chris. Appreciate your time, my friend. Stay warm, stay cozy.
Okay, you too.
Cheers.
Bye.